It's recording now. I got to press got it here on the screen. Okay. All right. Yeah, okay. I can play this first. I was going to play one attempt to play one on a flute, which isn't real easy on this flute because there are certain notes that this flute does not have. I'm forcing the flute to have these notes on it. And so because it's in a minor key and some minors are, well, you'll hear it as it goes. And this is my attempt to play God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen on an Indian flute. So here we go. You ready? Like I said, I attempted to play it, so that's it. Thank you. It's not something I play every day, so
it's in my ears. Sorry,
it's stuck in my mind. Okay, let's see. Eileen did have a picture on here of Eileen, but it disappeared. What happened to Eileen? We'd like to see your lovely face, if we may. Can you hit your camera again there? Yeah, hi. Hi. And Mary Downs, do you have a picture as well? No? Okay, well. All right, so is it time to do this little talk? Okay, all right. A lot of material here, and what I want to talk about today is, I get the Christmas talk, so I'm very happy about that in some ways, and in other ways, I'm thinking, okay, the Christmas talk. What do you do with that? But here's what you do with it. In this case, I'm going to give a little bit of history of where all this came from and how we got to where we are today with the idea of Christmas. And then I would like to talk a little bit about the nativity story that is described in Scripture and embellished quite a great deal, just as Christmas has been. You would think that Christmas is, oh, hi, Mary, she's just traveling today and she's just listening. So thank you for being here listening. Okay. The history of Christmas. Christmas, you would think, goes back to the birth or near the birth of Jesus the Christ. And it's tied into him in some way, but it's really not a 2,000 some odd story. This story is actually more like 4,000 years old, the whole idea. Somewhere in there, somewhere in that range, because the idea of Christmas has borrowed from many other traditions for quite some time, about 4,000 years, maybe longer. It's buried now under the catalog of a holiday, and it's recognized as a Christian holiday by many people and a secular holiday by another many people. The annual festival is celebrated on different days. December 24th, which was the scheduled day for my family growing up, because the entire family, the extended family and everything, all the other cousins and uncles and aunts and grandparents and so forth, all met together on December 24th had a meal together, then walked into the living room of our matriarch's house, my aunt. And then we began, after my uncle spent much time making sure with his light meter that he could record, could film everything. Oh, would you hurry up and get that thing going so we could unwrap these presents. So finally that would happen. And we would then have this flurry, this frenzy of package opening. And once that was all done, then everyone would go home to their different homes and celebrate what was left of Christmas, Santa Claus coming for us kids. That would happen in our private homes. And so for us, the grand celebration was December 24th. And for many other people, it was that way as well. A lot of people just think of Christmas Eve as being Christmas. December 25th is the one we use in the Gregorian calendar, Pope Gregory's idea of the calendar. And yet some other religions, Christian religions, celebrate on January 7th because they use a different calendar. They use the old Julian calendar, which doesn't coincide exactly with the calendar we use today, but they still celebrate on that day. And that day falls on January 7th for most people. Then January 19th is also celebrated as a Christian holiday in some other places. We don't celebrate it so much here, but other religions do celebrate it at that time. There are other things that are developed that go back 4,000 years that we use in Christmas. One of them being the Christmas tree. Another is the idea of giving presents, and the whole idea of welcoming the sun back again. So as we say, welcoming the sun, S-O-N, a lot of pagan, what we call pagan religions, celebrated welcoming the sun, S-U-N, back, especially northern Scandinavian countries who waited for it. And when they saw it, they called out, Yule, Yule. And this meant the sun has come back again. Because as you know, because of the tilt of the earth, the sun disappears for a couple of weeks. So the tradition was, we have to build a giant fire, and this fire will tempt the sun back to us. And that's the way they viewed it. And the sun came back, of course, and we all now know it would. They weren't so sure that it was going to come back every year if they didn't participate in some way. So they did, and they had these big long logs they hauled in, and the log burned for the time, from the time that the sun disappeared until the sun returned. And that was what we call the Yule log, and we still use the words Yuletide as a part of Christmas. I want to tell you a little bit about, this is kind of a gory thing that the Romans did, and I wanted to tell you about that. The idea of prior to Christian celebrations, Roman pagans celebrated this holiday of Saturnalia or Saturnalia, some people say. And it was a raucous time. It was raucous and rocking. It was an amazing time where they drank, they ran naked through the city. They forced somebody to run ahead of them, and they treated this person pretty badly. What they called it, the community victim. And they forced them to indulge, they force-fed them to indulge in food and festivities and going from place to place and being a fool. Then at the end of that time, they murdered this person. And that idea of murdering this person was to destroy the forces of evil. That was on December 25th at the end of the year, which to them was the birthday of the sun returning again. Then in the 4th century, as we know it today, Christians were successful at converting pagans to Christianity and allowing them also to continue the celebration of Saturnalia. And this was its first connection to Jesus' birth. Now, the festival of Saturnalia, of course, had no connection to Jesus' birth or to any kind of Christian teaching. And the leaders tacked onto this holiday of Jesus' birth the last day of the festival. And so that was when Jesus was supposedly born. It was on the last day of this festival, December 25th. They continued to allow this celebration, though, to go on in a lawless way with sexual indulgences and singing and running naked through the streets and so forth. And then they even had the killing of the person, but it was translated into eating a biscuit with ginger in it, shaped like a person. And of course, we call that today gingerbread men. The gingerbread man. But before there was a gingerbread man, there was an actual killing of the gingerbread person. Okay. And they started wearing clothes too. They started not being nude any longer. One thing, though, that happened that was kind of strange is that not all Christians celebrated the birthday of Jesus at all. And they were the Puritans. The Puritans said, well, you know, this holiday's got too much fun going on. You know how the Puritans are. You know, fun is bad. So fun is next to the devil. And so they stopped doing that completely and didn't have any Christmas at all. Although some sects of Christianity continued to do this. One of the things here that happened that I think is very, very sad and shameful is that during in Christianity around 1466, used the same idea that the Romans had used with somebody, and they forced Jews to run naked through the streets and then either beat them severely or kill them at the end of the celebration, because it was their fault that Jesus died. That was their view. It was a terrible thing. And that's the way they marked the birth of Jesus, is by doing cruel things. Doesn't seem too natural, does it? Then when the Saxons, the Germanic peoples of Europe, were converted to Christianity, they brought the word Yule, as I talked about earlier, meaning midwinter, and they burned the Yule log in the fireplace, and they lit a Yule candle rather than following any of the customs that we use today. Traditions were not defined for Christmas, even though, you know, many people say this thing about, you know, Jesus is the reason for this season, and put the Christ back in Christmas. And, you know, there was the former president was saying he was going to bring Christmas back, and you could say Merry Christmas again and so forth, as though it had been a holiday that had been celebrated since time immemorial. The truth of the matter is that in Christianity, and in society, it wasn't even celebrated particularly as an important event until the 19th century. So in the 1800s is when this all sort of started coming together throughout Europe and America. They solidified it. The idea of Santa Claus is taken from the idea of a Dutch tradition of a man named Saint Nicholas. And as I've talked before in years past, there is two ways of looking at the name Santa Claus. One is the Dutch way, which they said the name Sinterklaas, Sinterklaas, and it was with two A's, K-L-A-A-S, Sinter, Sinte is the way we would say it. Sinterklaas. And that was their way of saying Saint Nicholas. The idea of Saint Nicholas comes from the Mediterranean regions. He was a saint, a man who was a priest, who was very interested in children in a good way. He gave them gifts. He gave them gifts. And these gifts that he gave them, he was recognized later after his death as a saint. But this all took place in the Middle East. By the time he got to the Dutch idea of Sinterklaas, he had changed, and he no longer had swarthy features as he was a Middle Easterner. He got changed over to he got whitened up, you know what I mean? And that happens a lot to a lot of people. Jesus, it happened, and so forth. But the idea is they wanted him to look more like them. They changed his green coat to a red coat. They added white fur around the edges of his coat, or his green cloak, and put a little cap on his head, and he became the Santa Claus that we know. Also, some of there was also the idea that Santa Claus comes from the Spanish regions and from the regions of Rome. And that is because he was called San Nicolas. San Nicolas. And if you say that enough times, Santa Claus, Santa Claus, it turns from San Nicolas into Santa Claus. That's the way we see it today. But he was one of the senior bishops who attended the Council of Nicaea in 325 current era, 325 AD. And he was well liked and very popular. And that's how that came forth. The pagans then also added in the idea that he was like Woden. He was Odin, as we sometimes say. And he then, after he was transformed into this character who looked a lot like Woden, Woden was supposedly said who had the long white beard, and during the winter times and cold weather, he flew on a winged horse through the sky and dropped presents down for the children who were good and nothing, or just a piece of coal for the ones who had been naughty that year. And we carry that tradition as well, that you get a piece of coal in your sock if you've been naughty that year, or you get presents, you get nuts, oranges, apples, so forth in your sock, in your stocking. That's the way that all happened. Now, it wasn't really until 1809 that the idea of Santa Claus reemerged with the writings of Washington Irving. He wrote a thing called the Knickerbocker History in 1809, and he referred to this white-bearded, horse-flying Saint Nick, even way back then. Now, something changed along the way when Dr. Clement Moore started with an idea called, which we call today, The Night Before Christmas, a poem. This poem then was translated into languages all over the world, and the idea of a jolly old elf who was pulled on a sleigh through the sky by 8 reindeer emerged. Before that was not the story, and that's not the way, but it caught on. People liked that myth. They liked that idea, and children especially thought it was a wonderful, wonderful poem, a wonderful idea. Then, finally, we have in 1931 the idea of the Santa Claus as we now see in our minds and see all over everywhere written up in advertising. This was captured by Coca-Cola. the Coca-Cola company invented the Santa Claus that we now see and dearly love all over the place. And that was the jolly old elf described, first of all, in the 1800s, 1834, and then through that poem, and then translated by Thomas Nast, a great person who was more actually a political cartoonist. He invented the Santa Claus we know today, and was asked to draw this up by Coca-Cola. That's how I got started. The Christmas tree itself is a pagan tradition. It goes back to Druid times, way back. The idea of mistletoe goes back to those times as well. Kissing under the mistletoe first started with the idea of meeting under a tree with mistletoe on it of warriors and coming there in peace. So it was a way of keeping them from fighting one another. And this fighting then led from simple handshakes and so forth into kissing your significant other or whoever you wanted to kiss underneath the mistletoe. And that's how that whole tradition began. Look at how this thing has developed over the years, the idea that we celebrate this. It's an amazing thing. But it really wasn't developed until completely until the Hallmark Company started making and producing Christmas cards. That's the final touch right there. Now we have a holiday that started as a brutal event and turned into a hopeful event of we hope the sun will return. Then from that, it gets developed further until it's no longer an overlay of a Christian event on top of this old pagan event. The idea of Jesus being born at this time is quite illogical that there would be a bunch of shepherds out in the fields in freezing weather. None of that makes sense. Poor little lambs freezing in the cold like that. You know, they brought them inside, just like any normal shepherd would do. Now we've got it all down to where it is a minor idea of it being a religious holiday and much more of a major commercial enterprise. That's the way Christmas has evolved and the way it is today. You'd think someplace along the line that people having minds, having brain power, would be able to look at some of these ideas that we have had in the past and say, how can that be? How can it possibly be that a young woman, now I'm switching over and I want to go into the idea of not just the Christmas historical evolution, but I want to go into the idea of Mary having this baby and the actual story, the nativity story, let's call it, the birth story of this young baby. It's always confused me. It's always left me with question marks in my head instead of exclamation points. And that is, how could anybody possibly believe that a young girl could conceive all by herself a child and then be surprised later in life that this child had gifted powers? Something's wrong with that story from the very beginning. It's what I have referred to before as flogic. That's a flawed logic. It's taking an illogical, untenable assumption and carrying it out logically from that point on. It happens all over this story. a young woman is visited by an angel. Whoa, so let's stop right there. Visited by an angel. And this angel tells her, that's what Christianity calls the annunciation or the announcement, that she is now conceiving and going to bring forth a child all by herself, because she has been nailed by she has been given a chance to be connected with the Holy Spirit, like God itself, himself, herself, however you want to look at it. And from this holy connection, a special child is being born. This is the way it's described in the very beginning of this story. But later on, during Jesus' ministry, she and the other sons, his brothers and sisters, go to him and say, "What are you doing? What's happening here with you?" If she knew that he was born in this miraculous way, why would she question at all what was going on in his ministry? Why would she question his ability to turn water into wine? But the scriptures tell us that she was amazed. Amazed? Very strange. So I've always had these questions about it in my mind, and I'm sure many of you have too. You look at this whole idea of this story and say, this is pretty unbelievable as it's described. That may be so if we look at it with our human minds. That's why I love unity, because unity tells us, don't look at this stuff literally. Look at it spiritually. Look at it as though it's happening within you, as opposed to happening someplace else, to someone else at some other time. It's happening right here, right now, within every one of us. That's the unity message. You want a rebirth? You want that spirit of purity to come forward in your life? Don't look in the outer for it to happen. Look within yourself. Let it begin with you. Let it begin with each one of us. Strive for peace and joy and love and laughter and goodness right here and right now in your lives. Then we can look back and we can say, Merry Christmas. And that Merry Christmas means to us, awaken the Christ within. And that becomes the special season for each and every one of us, something that brings us happiness and joy. In the meantime, recognize that it is what it is. It's a celebration. It is a commercial event. And it is something that we all share together now based on traditions that go back further than Christianity or any other idea of a religion that we know. That's it for today. God bless and Merry Christmas to each one of you.